Hello, and welcome to Judy's Creations in Crochet. And today is March 1st, 2022. How quickly February sped by us. And did you know that March is National Crochet Month? And I might mention that again a little bit later. You're going to be seeing probably ads and mentions of that throughout social media and in some of the ads that you get on YouTube and so on. So we should celebrate by crocheting a storm this month. So I promised this week that we would concentrate a little bit more on finished objects. So I have a few to show you, but I have to tell you, I have had a very poor week in completing crochet projects. I know I mentioned to you a few weeks back that I would probably in about 2 weeks or maybe 3 be doing one complete episode on sweaters. And working on sweaters has not gone the way I anticipated. And so I got a little bit frustrated, I have to admit. So we're going to put the sweater episode off to the late summer or early fall. I may show you a sweater between now and then, but I've just decided to put off working on sweaters. I have several in mind I want to do, and I found several patterns I'm really excited to try, but I just don't think now is the time for me to look at sweaters. So that's down the road. And then I wanted to start one of my Make 9 objects. And excuse me. And I had ordered some wool specially for one of the ponchos in the Make 9. And I went to make it on the weekend. And the solid color, which will be black, is not the same weight as the variegated color. They're both called number 4s, but the black is way heavier than I would have liked. So I put that aside because I'm going to order some DK in black, and hopefully it will come a little closer to the weight of the variegated yarn. And even if it isn't the same weight, I will much prefer working with a DK than this particular worsted because it was way heavier than I like. So I put that aside. And yesterday I started working with a yarn I'd never used before, and it was quite fuzzy. It had mohair in it, and I've worked with mohair before, but this was fuzzier than anything, and it was a very, very easy shawl pattern, very basic. I couldn't get it right, I think partly because of the yarn, and ripping it out was, well, you know what it's like frogging when it's got a heavy, heavy halo. And I just said, I'm never going to use this yarn. I'm ready to throw that yarn in the garbage. So today when I'm done this video, I'm going to find another project to work on. So I only completed one project in the last week, but I went diving in my stash of items that have been completed for quite a while and found you some things to see today. So I'm going to put off what I'm wearing to the end of my FOs, and I'm going to start here with what Hope is wearing. Now, one day I think I'm going to do an entire episode on patterns by one of my favorite designers, and that is CJ Brady. This is I believe it's a triangular shawl. It might be a boomerang shawl. And the pattern, very straightforward because it is double crochets, 3 double crochets, and then there's 3 spaces, 3 double crochets, and 3 spaces. But She always starts, not always, not every pattern is an asymmetrical, but a lot of her patterns start at a point and they get wider, so you have to watch the pattern for the increases. And then some of them decrease. This one went to a flat end, so I have to guess it's an asymmetrical triangle. So the pattern is called, let me see, it's called Just Breathe by C.J. Brady. And you know, as always, everything I talk about will be linked in the description box below. So this is Just Breathe. And the yarn I used in this, I don't have it anymore, but I have lots like it. It's a pearlescent fingering, and I have another skein out just to show you. Can you see the shine on that yarn? Pearlescent fingering at one time was my very favorite yarn to work with. I have several now that I really enjoy, but this is beautiful yarn. I'll tell you a little bit about it. It's from Expression Fiber Arts. You know, I use a lot of their yarn. Pearlescent fingering has 50% superwash merino wool and 50% mulberry silk. That's why you see the shine. It's the silk. And it is so soft. And it has 550 yards in a hank. So it goes a long way. I see they have some sweaters made out of it, and one day I'm going to make a sweater, and it would only take 3 hanks. So that is beautiful, beautiful yarn. I'm going to say more about them in a minute. So that's one finished object. I made this several years ago, 2-3 years ago, and I just love her patterns, and I love pearlescent fingering yarn. They also have pearlescent worsted for those of you that prefer a heavier weight. Okay, I'm going to set her back out of the way a little bit and move over. Now, the one thing that I did manage to complete in the last week, maybe it was the week before and I didn't get to it last week, was a shawl. And you know how I like my Granny Meets Virus shawls? I managed to do one of those, and here it is. I saw this completed by somebody else on a Facebook page. I belong to several crochet Facebook pages, and I saw this done. It's a mandala or mandala, however you say it, lion brand mandala, in the color Centaur. I'm sure you all, there's the color name, Centaur. I'm sure you're all familiar with lion brand mandalas, 100% acrylic. And I used 2 cakes, but in the first cake, it was going to end with this light color, and it wasn't going to start right in the next cake. So I just took off the end of that cake, and the second cake, I didn't get to the very, very dark. See how after the sort of rusty color, it goes into, it's sort of a brown, and then I think that looks more gray than anything. Well, I got, as you can see at the bottom, rusty and then into the brown. But if I was going to do, the next part is the granny part, I would have to do the whole section, and I wasn't going to have enough, and I didn't want that light color at the end, and it was really quite large enough as it was. So I stopped at that point. Now I'm going to ball this up with what's left. So you can make a good size shawl with about, I would say, 1.5 cakes. If you want a huge shawl, you can get a huge shawl out of 2 cakes. 1 cake ended probably right about the end of the granny section, because you don't want to do part of, see, if I put the cream on it, I would have been doing part of a virus. I really enjoy doing this shawl. It gives me a break from other things when I need a break, and so I make them quite often. And there's so many different um, fibers, so many different yarns you can make them out of, and they just look so nice. So that's another Granny Meets Virus that I finished. So next, this is my week of wraps. Next, I have another wrap. I call it a wrap when it's a really, really wide rectangular shape. Some people call them shawls, like what I'm wearing. I call them wraps because a shawl to me is more of a triangular shape. Now, this is quite wide and it's quite long. I think it's something like 72 inches long. Now, I want to show you, and I want to tell you a little bit about this. This shawl, I don't know if they call it a shawl, I call it a wrap, is called the Renata, Renata. And it's a pattern that is put out by Expression Fiber Arts. Notice that the first section has this grid. And then when you change colors, you go into fans. See all the fan work in the middle there? And then you go back to, in the middle, you go back to the grids. I want to talk about that in a minute. And then it just repeats. This is the middle, and on both sides, it's the same. And this is made with Expression Fiber Arts yarn, 3 different colors, and I still have the creamy color and the purple, and it's made with, see, this is how I use hair clips to hold the ends so they don't unravel. This is made with Cashsilk sock, again, one of my favorite yarns, and this is called Purple Heart Plant. It's a fingering weight yarn, and it's 75% superwash wool, superwash merino, 15% cashmere, and 10% silk. That's why it's called Cashsilk yarn, sock yarn. And there are 410 yards in a skein. This one happens to have been caked up, and I didn't need it. Now, 2 things I want to point out. First of all, I know many of you, know that I talk about Expression Fiber Arts quite a bit. And I know many of you will likely never buy the yarn because it is a little more expensive. And maybe you're afraid to try hand-dyed yarns. But I would strongly recommend that you at least go on their site, expressionfiberarts.com, and sign up for their newsletter for several reasons. First of all, every single month, they do a giveaway of yarn. All you have to do is sign up for the newsletter and hit the sign me up button. I do it every month. And they give away, generally speaking, 17 skeins of yarn. It's different every month. So there's always a chance to win their yarn. The other thing that they do is every Friday, they release a new pattern that is either knit or crochet. They go back and forth between knit and crochet. And it's free for a limited time, usually, well, at least a week, sometimes a couple of weeks. They have a free pattern. You don't have to use their yarns to do the pattern. And this particular wrap was a free pattern when they released it. And then they did a crochet along with it. And every year they seem to do about two or three crochet alongs. It used to be I saw them in the spring and the summer, spring and the fall. But I think this past year they did 3 crochet alongs. This was a crochet along. First time I had ever participated in a crochet along. And they divided up into usually 4 sections, and at the end of each section you can show a picture, and then they have a draw for some yarn or credit in their store. And to participate in the crochet along, you do not have to be using their yarn. You can use any yarn. And their patterns tell you what kind of yarn. In this case, it was a sock weight. Other cases, it may be worsted weight or fingering weight. This particular pattern could be done in any weight you want. And I'll show you what I did with part of it in a minute. So it's worth going on their site, seeing the new releases. And if you're a knitter, they do way more knitting patterns than they do crochets. They have about a third more, 50% more knitting than they do crocheting. And they do all styles. They do wraps, they do shawls, they do tops, they do hats, scarves, everything. So it's worth your while to go on their site and get the free patterns. I have quite a collection of their free patterns. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you about this was this section right here, which I call the grid section. I used that part of the pattern, not this row in here, just the grid section. I used it to make this wrap I am wearing right here, which I'll show you in just a second. I wanted to tell you about this first before going on to this. So you can take a part of a pattern. People don't think about that. But I wanted to make this wrap, and I had this yarn. See that it has sequins in it? I'm pretty sure this is yarn I got from Ice Yarn, because I can't figure out anything else, so I'm thinking it's Ice Yarn. And I wanted to make a wrap, a neutral wrap, and I wanted to make a fairly easy pattern so it would go fast. I thought the yarn itself with the sequins was pretty enough without getting a very fancy pattern. And I simply took that grid part, see the grid? There it is, throughout. And I had to change the numbers a bit because I made it a little bit, I think I made it a little bit narrower than the other. But anyhow, there's that grid. And I just did the grid and then some solid lines, and then I did the grid again. Can you see? So I simply took the idea from the other pattern and made this wrap. And this is shorter than, this is quite a long wrap. Even when I fold it in half, you can see it's quite long. So that's what I did. I took the grid out of this one and I put it into this one. Now, the other thing I want to mention before we are finished with FOs, this is my last FO. I don't have many this week, like I said, is I wanted to mention that sometimes people wear them, you know, just around their arms to take the cool off at night, or as an accessory when they go out. Rather than have a sweater, they have a wrap. And sometimes they get in the way. Some wraps are thin enough, like lightweight enough, you can bunch them up and make a scarf. This one you couldn't. But it can get in your way. So one thing you can do is clip it, like I have, and people get shawl pins and they pin it. Now, you want a decent shawl pin to hold it. But there are other ways to hold it, and I wanted to show you this. This just happens to be, wait till I take it out, undo it and take it out. It happens to be a hairpin. It's a hairpin I got in our Shoppers Drug Mart, which is a pharmacy. I just got this hairpin, has a clip on the back. So I have, and it's a bit bent or concave, so I can put some fabric in there and then close it up. So that's a very reasonable way to put a shawl pin on an item. And this shawl pin, or this shawl, by the way, I'll just hold it up now that I have it off. And the other thing you'll notice is I did that pattern, that grid at the end, then I did everything plain, and I did that grid at the other end. Dressed it up a little bit, otherwise it's pretty plain, worked fast. Of course, this is yarn that you have to be a little bit careful with. There's half, so you can see it's not as long as the last one I showed you. I'm not going to put that back on. I'll show you why later. So that's the end. Oh, one last thing I want to say. I happened to come across a video, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it was on the YouTube channel called Bonnie Bay Crochet. I don't know how many of you are familiar. It's Bonnie Barker, who is the host of the channel, and her channel is called Bonnie Bay Crochet, and she designs, I've seen a number of her shawls. She designs everything, but I've seen a few of her shawls that I really want to try to do. But she happened to have a video on ways to style a shawl. Now, to me, this is a wrap, and she didn't do this wrap, but she has done one that was more square in another video, and I'll try to find that someday and post it down below. But I will post a link to the video that has new ways to style shawls. And she has a lady who has a business with various shawl pins and buttons and so on. I'm going to get a few of her items. But I thought you might find it interesting. Even something like what Hope is wearing, she showed a very unique way to style that. And she has the accessories to pin it in place. And I will put a link to that video in the description box below. Okay. Excuse me. So that finishes finished objects. The next thing I want to talk about, people are often discussing or have YouTube channels showing their WIPs and their finished objects. WIPs. And you've never really seen me show WIPs. And I'll explain why. WIPs stands for Works in Progress. It's very rare for me to have more than one item in progress at a time. I know there are people, some YouTube channels, creators, and some designers that work on 2 or 3, even more items at a time. And there are jokes out there about how many WIPs do you have, and the WIP is long, long, long. To me, a WIP is something I am working on, and I may have 2 WIPs, meaning I'm working back and forth between the 2. But if I start a project and it's not going well, and I say, put that on a back burner, and it goes into a project bag and down here in my sewing room, never to be thought of for months and months or years, or maybe never again, it's not a WIP, even though it started. To me, that's called a UFO. A UFO is a term I learned in cross stitch, meaning unfinished object. FO, finished object, UFO, unfinished objects. So if I started something and then I put it aside, not to think about it at all, not to work on it at all, it becomes a UFO. It's in timeout, as I mentioned one other week, and it becomes a UFO. And I do have UFOs, but I'm not one that enjoys going back and forth between a project. When I start a project, I want to finish it. Now, there was one exception. Remember, I was working on that shawl for the magazine, which is supposed to come out sometime this month. So hopefully I'll have it to show you soon. As you know, I got very frustrated with that pattern and with the problems I was having with the yarn. So I made that bulky scarf I showed you a couple of weeks ago, because very, very straightforward. It was just double crochets with a bulky yarn. So I would work on it for an hour or two in the evening because I was tired of that shawl. So at that point, I did have 2 WIPs going, but that both of them are finished, long gone. And I don't have a project at all that I'm working on. I had planned one to start today, but I think I may change my mind. So I thought I would look in my stash of project bags to see how many UFOs do I have. And maybe I should pull out a UFO and finish it. That happened to me quite a bit in cross stitch. I would start a big project and often get sidetracked to something else and put it away and never get back to it, or get back to it a year later. I have a number of UFOs in cross stitch, but I don't have all that many in crochet. There are times when I start a project and I say, this is not going well, or I don't like it, and I put it aside. And when I go back to look at it, I say, I don't know what I was making, or I don't want to make that anymore, and I rip it out. And I can look in my project bags, I don't know how many of them, maybe 2, 3, or 4, where I have projects I started and decided I didn't want to complete them. And I draw them out. So after frogging them and balling the yarn is sitting in a bag. I don't know what I'm going to make, but I don't call it a UFO because it is not a project at all. I'll have to look at the yarn again and decide on a project to make. But I thought I would show you that I actually have 3 UFOs. I'm going to show you those 3, and I was going to ask you, which one do you think I should pick up even right now, this week, and get started on it, and try to take one off my list. But I've kind of changed my mind about that. I'll explain in a minute. So here is my first UFO, and unfortunately, I did not mean it to be a UFO. I was enjoying making it. I was really interested to make it. I'll show you what it looked like and why it caught my attention. You'll know. But here's how far I got. It's a shawl. Obviously, it's in that shape. And it has I'm thinking it has an 11-row repeat. The actual pattern is done with a chart, which I love, and it comes in several sections, and I'm into the repeat part. But I got going, and you'll see that I'm in the middle of a row there because I discovered, I think I put it aside at the time because something else had to get done, or came along that I wanted to do. But I went back to pick this up and discovered that it had a mistake. And I thought it was just a matter of taking out the last row and redoing it. And in doing that, I come to discover I had to take out a fairly big section and go back to even before the repeat started. So that kind of put me off, and I didn't. But look at the cake I'm using. It's in one of these things with a hole, so I can't take it out. But look at the cake. Isn't that going to be beautiful? I'm working from the outside. Usually work from the inside, but I'm working from the outside because I wanted that dark color at the bottom. I'm thinking now I should have put it at the top because I love purple, and that would have been closer to my neck. But that was just my thinking at the time. I have a second cake of this to make something else. I really liked it so well. Now, this is what it is supposed to look like. There we go. There we go. So can you see it? That's the shawl. And you can see why it caught my attention. Those beautiful, beautiful purples. And it is called Sugar Plum Shawl. So it's not something that's going to sit there and never be finished. I will get at it. And I'm thinking maybe this summer I would like to finish it. I love shawls and I would really like to get back to that. Now, the other UFO I have, and I actually picked it up to finish it a few weeks back. And it's another shawl. And it's called the Genius Shawl. And I think some of you would have heard of it before. And it's done with yarn art. You know, I really like those cakes. I had to take it apart and now it's in a ball. But it's caught on the wrapper. The wrapper has tape. Yeah. Okay, so this shawl changes. It has different sections in it, and the pattern is changing. And the bottom has a very, what I call, heavy pattern with baubles that looks like leaves almost at the bottom. Well, if I make a mistake in the count in section like this or like this, I can usually fudge it and work in an extra stitch somewhere or take out a stitch somewhere. But this part at the bottom has to have a very specific number of stitches, and it's a large number. Like I think it's a dozen for each pattern. I'm not fond of baubles, to be honest with you. And I knew I had a miscount. Both sides weren't the same. So I took it out, and I knew I'd have to come back to it later. I didn't have the patience. Well, when I came back to it later, I thought, okay, I'm just going to take out the last row or two till I get the right count, which I did. And then I realized I didn't have a number that was the right multiple. Well, I can usually even do an extra row or two and include an extra stitch or two to make it work. This was not ever going to get the right multiple because I'd made a mistake earlier, and I was not tearing out all the way back because these cakes have 1,000 yards in them, and that's quite a bit that I have done. And when I looked at it, I thought, you know what? I don't really care if I have those leaves in the bottom and those heavy baubles. I'm just going to take part of, I took it all out, got frustrated at the numbers, even though I tried to make it work, and finally said, enough of this. I'm just going to redo some of these other patterns. So I added more to this open work. And then I'm going to do probably these fans and open work until I run out. The beauty of it is the color. I'm not one to work with color, especially when this is sort of lime green in some areas. But can you see? Maybe you can tell here. It has sparkle in it. Sparkle all the way through. And the end is very dark. We get out of the lime green and get to a dark green. So I've decided that I'm going to start working on this week. I'm going to take it out of timeout. No longer a UFO. I am definitely going to work on it. Either I'll start it today or I'll do something else and start it when I finish the something else. But I suspect that when I'm done videotaping today, I'm going to go up and count and see if this is manageable to start continuing on, even if I just do regular stitches and open mesh all the way down for the rest of it. Being that it is March, and March is all about green, And this is National Crochet Month. I should maybe finish this screen project. And I have one further UFO, and I had forgotten about it. Quite honestly, I had forgotten about it. So here's the other UFO, and this is ice yarn. I have it in a box because I didn't have a project bag big enough. This is the ice yarn that I got a long time ago, and you can see why I love it. First of all, it's fuzzy. Second of all, it's even got metallic in it, and it's purple. And this is an object that I'm going to use this yarn to make something for me. Well, I had a hard time deciding, and this is the question I want to ask. Since I'm not going to ask you which one to start on next, I've decided it's going to be the green one. I started making a poncho. Very straightforward. I have regular rows and then rows with open work. This fuzziness is too much to do anything complicated, although I may go and look at a pattern by Crystal at Bag O' Day and add in something. I'm not sure what. But my question with this is, will I wear a poncho this fancy? Or before I get any further, and I wouldn't even have to take it apart, I could start with the other skeins, because there is 160 meters in a skein, which even if I only use these 6 would be 960 meters, which is well over 1,000 yards. Maybe I should make a shawl instead. I'm not sure how much I would wear this poncho. It's quite warm, so it could be an outdoor poncho, but I wouldn't wear it as an outdoor poncho when it's this fancy. But as an indoor poncho, it could be worn as an indoor poncho. Put it over a black top and wear it somewhere, but I don't have anywhere to go to wear it. Any place I go, it wouldn't require something quite that fancy. Now, a shawl, I don't wear shawls a lot either, but if I make it the right size, I like to wear, I don't wear shawls around like a shawl. This is a little bit bigger, but what I like to do with a shawl, if it's the right weight, is to wrap it around like this. Now, this is very heavy. I wouldn't wear this normally, but if I made it in this lighter weight, this is lighter weight than Mandala. It doesn't tell me what weight, but there's the thread, so you can see it's not quite as heavy as Mandala. Should I make a shawl instead that I could wear, you know, say to church or to someplace, go visiting, that I could wear like this? That's how I would make a shawl. So I wouldn't have to make it huge, not as big as this one. Or should I save it? Because if I took this apart, and I would have 1,400 meters, which would be, 1,600 or 1,500 yards. I could make a sweater out of it. And even though it's fuzzy and metallic-y, I would get more use out of a sweater if I could take this apart carefully. How does it frog? I don't remember. I would have to do it very carefully because of the fuzz. But I think I could frog it. So it's either a sweater or a shawl, because honestly, as much as I wanted to make this poncho, I'm not too sure. So I would like to hear your opinions on what should I make with this beautiful metallic and mohair yarn? Okay, that's the question I would love to have you answer in the comments below. So that brings us to the end of another week. Hopefully I have more finished. Oh, next week we're not going to do a lot of finished objects. I will have a couple. But I discovered today when I was looking at something about this being National Crochet Month, I discovered that February was National Embroidery Month. And I have always been wanting to do one video, one episode, showing you cross stitch, showing you the cross stitch I've done, explaining what cross stitch is, because I've seen some people showing cross stitch kits and so on. It really, I didn't think were cross stitch. And cross stitch is part of embroidery, and I worked into it because it started with needlework, needle point, and then went into cross stitch. And I also did one Japanese punch embroidery. So I thought I would do one episode of embroidery / cross stitch. And since I missed the month and didn't find out until today as February ends, I thought, well, let's hurry up and do it next week. So next week, I'm going to do an episode highlighting my cross stitch. I hope you are interested to see that. I know it's nothing to do with crochet, and that's what my channel is about, but I am going to digress for a week. I see that others digress to other things as well, so I'm going to do one episode of that. So until we meet again, happy hooking.